Hey folks, welcome back to YouTube here. I'm Gene Della Sala, president of Audioholics, and today we're here with
Hugo Rivera, vice president of marketing. How are you doing today, Gene?
Hugo. I'm doing great, but I would like to clear some air before we continue on with this video.
I think it's much needed, to be honest.
Guys, I just want you to make sure that just because we're wearing blue shirts doesn't mean we're Scientologists.
We're not.
We're not here to check your thetan levels. We're not here to sell you Dianetics.
Nope.
It just so happens that when Hugo showed up to our recording studio today, he was wearing the same color shirt as me.
Go figure.
So, but it's appropriate because we're doing a video on cables.
Yeah, you know, and that's kind of like a religion to some.
It is. So we're here not as a prophet,
Nope.
but as an educator, and we hope that you find this of value today.
Exactly. And I'll tell you what, on that note, Gene, I'll refer to what our fans are asking. They're asking about bi-wiring and bi-amping. You know, is it any good?
That's a good topic. Probably something we should have covered a lot sooner than today. I'm glad we're bringing that up now. So I think we should start with bi-wiring, or some would refer to as bi-wiring.
Buy more cable?
Buy more cable? Yeah.
Buy wire. There you go.
Yeah, you know, back in the day, I used to bi-wire my speakers. You know, I was all happy about it. I had extra cable laying around. Let's talk about the mechanics of bi-wiring and what it is.
How do you bi-wire a speaker?
Okay. Basically, you take two pairs of cables. You tie one end of it together, put it on your amp side. The other end, you take the jumpers off your speakers. You have to have speakers that have at least two pairs of binding posts.
Right. Not every speaker. You cannot bi-wire every speaker.
Exactly, right. So by wiring, you have to take the jumpers off your binding post. You put one set of cables to the lows and one set of cables to the highs.
Okay.
And basically, you have a bi-wired connection at that point.
What's the claim? What effect does this give?
There's a lot of claims, Hugo. This is the audio industry, consumer audio with no checks and balances. So.
Yeah, we have, people have freeze cables and stuff like that. I'm sure that the claims are high.
Yeah, they're all high. Before we get into the claims, let me tell you the truth behind bi-wiring. Bi-wiring does change the impedance slightly that the amplifier sees from the load. And the reason why it does that now is you have two sets of cables interacting with the load instead of one. So the impedance changes slightly, and we have articles on this for all you propeller heads. I've done the math, we've done simulations. You could see the very small, minuscule differences that bi-wiring causes.
Yeah, definitely check out the links over here. I'll tell you what, Gene, is this something that you can listen? Is it audible?
You know, controlled listening tests, I've never been able to hear the difference between bi-wiring and single wiring, especially if you're using a good single wire to begin with. You know, measurably, you can measure. Just because you can measure something doesn't mean you can hear it.
Exactly.
Okay, our measurement equipment is far more sensitive, thousands to hundreds of thousands of times more sensitive and consistent than the human ear.
And I have to say, Gene, as somebody that has known you for years, I mean, you have some very good ears. I mean, you hear stuff that typically it's only heard by some equipment,
Yeah, I'm a bit anal retentive. That's why I got into audio. I just love sound, and I love truth in sound. I don't like the snake oil stuff. So the claims you asked for on bi-wiring, this was on the forums a lot years ago, and it's kind of died down. And I wonder if it's because of all the education we've been doing. But anyways, they would claim it reduces back EMF, it reduces distortion seen to the amplifier because now you got the highs going through one cable and you got the lows going through the other cable. It's all BS, Hugo, because what happens when you tie everything back together on one side, what does that signal do when you tie it together?
Yeah.
It's summed there. It's there at the amp.
Exactly.
The amplifier has a low output impedance. So, I mean, the claim that you're going to magically separate stuff when you're still doing a common connection to that point it's not even Star Trek physics.
That's what I was going to ask you. I'm like, okay, how are we separating things here? Okay.
It's almost analogous to putting a speaker on top of another speaker and thinking you're going to get separation. But that's a topic for another video.
Or plugging the wires to a battery or something like that, and then cryogenically freezing the stuff, which is pretty popular.
It is, yeah. So, with bi-wiring, my suggestion, if you have a good set of cables already that have low impedance, 10 gauge or 12 gauge equivalent resistance, bi-wiring, you don't really need to do it. If you've got extra cables lying around that are identical and you say, hey, I want to put them to use, bi-wire all you want. I mean, it's fun. You just tie them together on one end, put it on the other, and you could brag to your friends, look, I got my speakers bi-wired.
Ooh. Ooh.
So I think that covers the bi-wiring.
That reminds me of the little aliens from Toy Story. They're like, ooh.
We are internally grateful.
Awesome. So how about the biamping? What's biamping, first of all?
Biamping is a bit more complex because there's different forms of biamping. Okay, there's passive biamping, there's active biamping. So with passive biamping, you're using two amplifiers, one to power the lows, one to power the highs, and you're still using the internal crossover on the speaker.
Okay.
Now, some people say passive biamping is a waste of time, and I say, you know what, that's not true, because there's excellent situations that I've done passive biamping that have really worked. Okay, situations where you have a giant tower speaker, like our reference towers, for example, that have true subwoofers in them, not the crap that claims it plays down to 20 hertz, but speakers that play to 20 hertz at meaningful output levels. There's situations where you might want to run the lows as an LFE channel or a sub channel.
Okay.
And, you know, especially since they're right underneath the satellites, you could run them as stereo bass.
Right.
So you could cross them over higher. And if you cross over a speaker higher and you're doing stereo bass, you get that, you know, better transient effect that you don't typically get with a small subwoofer satellite system.
Okay.
So that's a case where passive biamping can really help. And what you could do is you could use a separate amp for the subwoofers. You could adjust the gain on them.
Right.
You could adjust the crossover on the processor. You're still using the crossover in the speaker, but you still have more customization at that point.
Understood.
Okay, and I've set up systems that are 7.2 systems using passive biamping and using the bottom bass drivers as subs. It saves floor space. You get great integration, and it's a highly successful avenue to pursue.
Okay.
So that's the passive biamping. Then you've got active
Active,
biamping. And active biamping is, and this is pretty hardcore stuff, it's when you take the crossovers out of the speaker.
Oh, wow.
Folks, don't try this at home. Okay?
Yeah.
Typically, you're going to buy a speaker that has active networks. You know, there are some brands that offer that. And the reason why they do the active is you do all the filtering at the line level before it gets
Right.
amplified.
Understood.
So now you really are separating the frequencies.
Exactly.
So one amp is producing a certain bandwidth, another amp is producing another bandwidth. The other thing is you have more control over the filter coefficients, because when you do things electrically, especially with active crossovers, you could control the slopes, the Q. I mean, it's far more precise than when you're using passive networks. And believe me, I'm not dissing passive networks. Some of the best speakers in the world, for example, our reference speakers, still use passive networks.
Okay.
But it's very expensive to do a really good passive network precisely. And you saw the crossovers in our reference speakers.
Yeah.
I mean, they're, you know, the inductors are the size of transformers and amplifiers.
Yeah, for real.
So, I mean, there's pros and cons to both, and that's another topic for another video. So, you know, in that case, active biamping, there's a lot of benefit to that. You could do stuff with room correction with that. You could do a lot of things at the line level. You could really customize the sound. Then there's two flavors of how you biamp as well. There's horizontal biamping and there's vertical biamping.
Okay. What are the difference there?
The horizontal biamping basically uses two channels from separate amplifiers, and the vertical one uses two channels from the same amplifier.
Got it.
Same chassis.
Understood.
So there's advantages and disadvantages to that. Again, doing it where you have separate chassis, you have separate power supplies, so you have more control, more power. When you have it all built into one chassis, that could work too, but in the cases with, you know, receivers, that could be a problem.
Understood. Okay. So when it comes to receivers, then what kind of benefit do you get?
Well, you know, the whole biamping thing in receivers, I have to say, we created kind of a frenzy about a decade ago. I took a Denon 5803 receiver, which was a 7-channel receiver, and back in those times, we were doing like 5.1. And I was like, you know, I'm not using surround back channels. What can I do with those extra 2 amps? This is before biamping ever existed in AV receivers. So what I did was I jerry-rigged it. I rigged the preamp outs from the surround channels into the preamp ins on the front. I calculated the gain to level match for unity gain between the channels. And all of a sudden I jerry-rigged it and I had biamp capability on my front channels. And man, I was happy.
How bad?
I put up an article on our site and it went viral, and it was just, it was popular. It really took off, and then Denon started making that a standard feature on all their receivers. Then Yamaha, then all the guys copied
You created
it.
a trend.
I did create a trend, and for a while it was cool because these super receivers that the manufacturers made years ago had big power supplies that could handle it.
Mm-hmm.
But now you're getting bi-amp capability in like $400 receivers that could barely drive 2 channels driven at its rated power. The benefits of the bi-amping in that case become less apparent.
Of course.
Now, you do use a lot less power in the tweeter than you do in the bass drivers. But, honestly, bi-amping in receivers, if it's a flagship model with a big power supply, try it. It's not going to hurt you. I found I got more bass control on my towers when I did it with the Denon, only because it had nice meaty power supply, and it really did help sonically to take you over the edge. So in that case it did, but the little receivers with the wimpy power supplies, just use those extra channels for another zone.
So I think this is another situation whereas they will say on Star Trek, we need more power.
Absolutely, and that's the problem. And you got to watch out for that, because a lot of times these receiver companies will just throw as many channels into a chassis as they can. They never increase the power supply. They just add more channels.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a problem. Well, that sounds really interesting, Gene. And of course, I think we need to remind the people that are just getting started with audio that these are more advanced topics. This is not something that they need to go ahead and kind of like kill their brains over at the beginning.
Yeah, and I agree. And, in some cases, bi-amping and bi-wiring, you don't need to do it at all. Our reference towers, for example, I don't bi-amp or bi-wire them. The designer of these speakers did such a great job with the crossover integration that I just found sticking a 2 kilowatt amplifier in each speaker, a monoblock amp, was the way to go.
Got it.
So there's different situations, folks, and the bi-amping definitely has a lot more merit than bi-wiring, but bi-wiring is a cool bragging right to show off to your friends.
Right. You get the little aliens going like, woo.
There you go. If you want that, then go for it.
Awesome stuff, Gene. Anything else to add?
I think we covered the topic well.
Awesome. Well, on that note, then I'll invite our viewers to go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Also, comment below. Let us know what you all think. Are any of you bi-wiring your stuff? Are you also bi-amping? Let us know. We always love to hear from our nice listeners out there.
Just don't stick your cables into an outlet.
Yes, do not try that, please.
Yeah.
Awesome. So on that note, until next time, keep listening.